Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part three. Well, I guess we can officially say it's back. For many schools, distance learning is returning as you reopen. And the question for all of us is how do we make it better? Well, welcome back, everyone, to part three of our four-part webinar series, Key Steps to Returning to School. And in part one, we asked if unfinished learning was a significant concern for your students. Because when we meet our students when school reopens, we know they will be walking in with unfinished learning. If unfinished learning is a strategic priority for you, then we say accelerate, don't remediate. To help you achieve this strategic priority, grade level content must be an academic priority using evidence-based practices. And in part two, we asked if you had a shared instructional framework that attends to grade level instruction with targeted support for all students. And does it distinguish between asynchronous and synchronous delivery models? We know this is important as you navigate the possibility of rolling closures this fall. You will need a shared framework as you pivot between remote and in-person learning. And trauma from disasters like wildfires, hurricanes have taught us that the loss of schooling may impact students' mental health, their social development, and their academic achievement. So, Melissa, this is something that you dealt with as a principal in California, correct?
That's correct. And some of that story can be found on our website in a blog that I wrote about that experience, and particularly taking into account what we really do have control over and really how we can focus our energies to what matters the most.
So, it'll be necessary in the new year to continue helping students recover and to prevent further damage. And we need to be sensitive on how COVID may have impacted our teachers as well, compounding the stress of working in a school with constrained resources and increases in social emotional care with students. Self-care will be paramount. Resources need to be put in place to help teachers and school leaders with self-care that ultimately improve the services that teachers and school leaders can provide students. So we're going to go through this first bullet in part three. So what we need to do is we need to build a bridge to support unfinished learning with a healing-centered approach. And in this session, we will investigate the accelerated learning approach of understand, identify, and take action to amplify the connection of SEL and CRT in action and academics. We will share resources to help clarify the importance of educator mindset and explicit actions to help foster an inclusive and integrated approach to learning. And as we did in the other webinars, we want to make sure you have time for dialogue, that you can pause the video to have these discussions. So this is the first question we would like you to think about, reflect on, and have a discussion with if you're with your instructional team. Do educators deeply understand the actions that unite and embed social and emotional and culturally responsive teaching practices? So just take some time to reflect and have a discussion on that, and then we'll come right back.
Welcome back, everyone. For more than a century, educators throughout the U.S. have strived and struggled to meet the diverse needs of American children and families. A complex system of biases and structural inequities is at play, and these factors are deeply rooted in our country's history, culture, and institutions. The system of inequity must be clearly understood, directly challenged, and fundamentally transformed. That comes from the New York State Education Department's framework for culturally responsive sustaining education. Now, more than ever, our social political context cannot be ignored. Students in all regions of our country and all grade levels need to develop skills that help them grapple with our complex world and manage the emotions that are so inflamed at this time. At Fostering Quality Schools, we believe that learning involves emotional processes and social interaction. Valuing these intersections is the hook for academics. Our interactions with students send powerful messages about who and what is valued. and our curricular selections convey our ideas, our principles, and our beliefs. We advocate for this accelerated learning approach because it holds high expectations for all students and strengthens the interdependencies of emotional learning, academics, valuing the background and language and learning styles that all students bring. What we're talking about is far beyond a set of best practices, but rather a process. And to do this systems change, although there are definitely promising shifts happening in the US right now, and people are bringing their best, overall, our education system is outdated, but there's specific actions that we can take. A theory of action and developing a theory of action is one of them. It's a statement of commitment to change, showing what you believe in and how your system will make these beliefs happen. Evolving our education system requires an equitable theory of action that is rooted in those high expectations. And it includes some policy change, definitely key instructional shifts, and surfacing beliefs. This means involving all stakeholders, all your family members and community members from historically underserved and under-resourced communities, and really engaging multiple perspectives so that we can lead well-rounded plans. If you already have a plan or a theory of action in place, invite a vetting group. If you're still in the planning process, bring in everyday people. Share viewpoints, aspirations, and beliefs. We need to hear multiple voices. In your documents, we share a sample theory of action with embedded social and emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching practices and processes in Appendix B. Right now, we invite you to read pages 1 through 2 in your resource. It's important to build on the strengths of the system that you have right now. So review what you have in place already. And what is the quality of that work? Use the resources we have provided and answer the questions to conduct a quality review. What stands out? What squares with your thinking in this piece? And what's still circling around? We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So the intersection of SEL and CRT is an important one because schools are, whether they're in person or online, meeting spaces for learners and educators from rich and diverse ranges of cultures, languages, and behavioral norms. We need to value, enact, and reflect on how cultural responsiveness can influence how students develop their SEL competencies. Their social and emotional learning skills can help us build communities that foster creative conversations across differences, so all of our students can confront injustice, hate, and inequity. Social emotional learning refers to the life skills that support people in experiencing, managing, and expressing emotions, making sound decisions, and fostering interpersonal relationships. Leveraging these skills and competencies seamlessly lend themselves to preventing all of the violence and building a more peaceful world that we all want to see. However, educators often teach social emotional learning in absence of the larger social political context, which is fraught with injustice and inequity and affects all of our students' lives. This is not the time to shy away from learning new ways to interrupt unjust practices. It's precisely the time to highlight the intersection, learning about emotions, equity, and cultural responsivity. We owe our students an education that centers on their lives and explicitly addresses the socio-political context. This will not only prepare our students to engage civically and peacefully across differences, but also to become the change makers and leaders that we need. We advocate and promote the investment of time and thought to ensure social emotional learning practices are enacted in ways that are culturally responsive for students from historically marginalized groups. As Joe mentioned in part 2 of this series, we shared an instructional framework that's inclusive and cultivates students' tenacity and dignity. And there's a balance between strengthening individual qualities and acknowledging that our lives are also shaped by outside forces. We advocate for this framework because it helps students make sense of both the academic world and engaging students and fostering their cultural lens to empower them to thrive and transform in the world. When culturally responsive and socially and emotionally learning qualities are surfaced, we want students and educators to work together beyond the surface strategies and interactions, but moving into how to co create a culturally relevant learning climate and help educators throughout the system examine all the implicit and unconscious biases we bring. Ultimately, we all need to build relationship and decision making skills and practice working collaboratively to affect change. One powerful way to do that is to value students, the assets that they bring, maintain high expectations, and accelerate, don't remediate. So let's dig in. In the acceleration and accelerated learning approach, while we embed SEL and CRT, we understand, identify, and take action. When this is done a few times, the process will yield more results and take less time over time. Teacher teams who collaborate to plan and to analyze and understand standards hold high expectations that can target support more efficiently. This is through collaborative conversations, and this is where we come to collective clarity on what we want our students to know and be able to do. Notably, when teachers analyze standards in isolation, they're likely to interpret the intent or the rigor differently, resulting in an educational lottery for students rather than the guaranteed and viable approach. This process keeps us all focused on what students need at high learning levels. So, in the understanding phase, it's important to understand all of the standards and to help choose the most essential concepts, analytical practices, language demands, and skills for your disciplines. There are the standards that every student is guaranteed. Read through the standards, circle the verbs, underline nouns and noun phrases, determine the number of targets that are found within each of the standards. Look at short term goals to guide instruction and learning progressions. See how all of the pieces connect and what is the most essential. What could you never imagine a student walking away from without getting from each of your grade levels? Those are your essential pieces. In the next step, when you write your learning targets and you're really deeply understanding your standard, you're thinking beyond just vocabulary. You're thinking about the language features and the structures and the disciplinary um, components that are necessary to dig deeper into complexities. So make sure during the understanding phase that you are holding and maintaining those high expectations and that you're willing to work with others. These are the practices and the processes by which culturally responsive and social and emotional learning happen at play. In the identification step, you really have to know your learner's strengths and interests. After observing students engaging in specifically designed grade level tasks or pre assessment, gauge if any unfinished learning exists for a whole class, for a small group, and what are those just in time schema activation and background knowledge pieces that you can provide for students so that they know and can grasp new information right away in the moment that it's happening. Knowing the depth of knowledge required for each standard leads to more thoughtful lesson design because now you can match what students need to know and be able to do and what your students are already bringing to the table. In the take action phase, ensure students are provided with just enough prior knowledge to grasp those new concepts related to new and relevant grade level learning. Maintain that high expectation and decide who, when, and how small groups will receive targeted support. Continue with the formative assessment cycle as new information is introduced Really define that clear success criteria so you can target your feedback, and think about building the capacity of individual students by leveraging the affective and cognitive scaffolding that students bring with them, and also how you're examining evidence to make sure that all of your students are learning and progressing with grade level expectations. In the next slide, we invite you to read pages 3 and 4 of your handout and document and think about what's at the top of your mind, what squares with your thinking. You can walk through each of the steps of understand, identify, and take action. And then on page 4, you'll be able to see how each of those competencies play out in each of the steps. So pause, reflect, and discuss, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. Melissa, I just have a quick little question for you. It sounds like, after groups went through these 2 pages, what's really going to be important is powerful planning, co-planning, collaboration, keeping the PLC in place where if you're in a remote setting, and then embedding the SEL and CRT practices within the lessons. Is that the cusp of the message here for schools to think about how they can do that and develop a process?
Absolutely. If there's any question about where to invest your time and where is going to get you the most, um, the heaviest lift, that would be during that planning time. Pre-planning and co-planning is essential. We know that we're going to have to shift between online and in-person environments. We know that there are going to be opportunities that two teachers are going to be teaching the same group of students in different delivery methods. So that co-planning piece is very, very important. To have a process and a clear way of thinking about that in place will be essential. Earlier in part 2, we also talked about, and part 1, we talked about the temptation for remediation. And what we want to work against here is remediation, and really think about how we can build on learners' skills and what they do have to reach those grade level standards. And so when teams of teachers work together to deeply understand their standards, they have more of an opportunity to spend looking at the other aspects and targeting instruction to reach the grade level expectation.
Great. So we'd like you to join us for part 4, which will be coming out soon after this video. And part 4 really talks about the continuum, the assessment continuum. So the assessment continuum is basically broken down into 3 cycles. You have your short cycle, your medium cycle, your long cycle. We know from research that the short and medium cycle have the most impact on student achievement. But this is a chance where you can redesign your assessment system, because we know summative assessments are not going to be impactful as they were before, especially with all the unfinished teaching that occurred last year. And if you want to move to an accelerated learning model, you need to have some things in place. So how do you do readiness pre-assessment to help you identify the most important prerequisite skills that students need for mastery at the appropriate grade level skill for that unit? And things are going to shift because we were all concerned about our pacing calendars, making sure we're staying on pace for our state assessments. There are some states that are going to, we don't know what's going to happen with our state assessments yet, but pacing shouldn't be the goal now. So what should be the goal now is depth. And if you identify pre-identified skills, sorry, I can't say that. So what you need to do is you need to allow teachers, when they do their co-planning, when they meet in their PLCs, to give them extra time, either in a targeted group setting or in a whole class setting, an asynchronous or synchronous setting, to give them more time to allow students to meet that mastery for those prerequisite skills. So that's what we're going to talk about in this assessment continuum, is rethinking and redesigning your assessment system. And it's not about tests, it's about pedagogy, it's about practices, And what are those powerful practices that you can put in for readiness pre-assessment as you come up to a unit? And then what can you do during a unit and after a unit that is going to give you the most leverage for student learning and to help you within that framework that we discussed in part two. So we want to thank you for coming. We hope these short bursts of content helps you and helps you develop strategies. We remind you, you can use that decision matrix that we gave you in part one to kind of help you think around these strategies. If school started for some of you, I know California, Arizona, some of you already started school. So we ask you to reflect on how school's going for the first week or 2 weeks. Is there anything you need to monitor, adjust, and pivot to? We're available. You can come see us at fosteringqualityschools.com. Feel free to email me or Melissa if you have any questions or need clarifications or set up any office hours. We'd be more than happy to sit and help you kind of think things out. So thanks so much, and we will see you on part 4.
Thank you.